Rain fell in a slow, steady drizzle that morning, the kind that soaks the world in silence. Black umbrellas moved like ghosts across the small cemetery on St. Mary's Hill. The air smelled of wet grass, cold metal, and loss. Under one of those umbrellas stood Arthur Miles, a retired Army sergeant in his late 50s. His uniform, neatly pressed, metal shining faintly, looked strangely out of place among the mourning suits. He wasn't there as a soldier anymore, but as a widower. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. His wife, Evelyn Miles, was being laid to rest after a long battle with cancer. She had been his world, the one who wrote letters to him during his deployments, who waited through 2 wars, who never complained when the medals came, but the nightmare stayed. Arthur stood at the edge of the crowd, his face calm but hollow. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched the folded American flag, the one that had once been draped over his best friend's coffin. Today it was for her. A priest murmured final words under the gray sky. She loved deeply, served quietly, and endured faithfully. Arthur barely heard him. His eyes were fixed on the wooden casket as it was lowered into the earth. His throat tightened, and for the first time in years, he couldn't summon the soldier's composure. He whispered under his breath, "You waited for me too long, Eve. I'm sorry." As the last of the mourners drifted away, Arthur stayed behind. He knelt by the grave, tracing his fingers over the nameplate. Evelyn Grace. Miles, 1969 to 2025. Forever my heart. Forever my home. He didn't notice the patrol car pulling up near the gate. Inside was Officer David Reynolds, a local cop barely 30, new to the force, still believing the world could be controlled by rules. He had been sent to check on a suspicious individual loitering near the funeral grounds. A report from a neighbor who didn't recognize Arthur in uniform. David stepped out, raincoat pulled tight. "Sir," he called out, approaching cautiously. "You can't be here after visiting hours." Arthur didn't respond. He didn't even turn around. "Sir," David repeated, louder this time. "This area is closing. I need you to step away from the gravesite." Arthur finally looked up, eyes red but steady. "This is my wife," he said quietly. "I just need a few more minutes." "Rules are rules, sir." "I can't." "Please," Arthur interrupted, voice breaking. "Just 5 more minutes." David hesitated. Rain pattered on his cap. He could have let it go, but procedure was procedure. He radioed in, "Dispatch, we got a non-competent individual at St. Mary's Hill, proceeding with verbal warning." Arthur stood now, breathing hard. "You don't understand, officer. She waited years for me. I can't walk away yet. Sir, I need you to calm down." Arthur took a step forward, frustration mixing with grief. "You think I'm a threat? I buried my life today." David misread the movement. His training kicked in. Too fast, too rigid. He raised his taser. "Don't!" Arthur barked, but before he could take another breath, crack. Electricity surged through the air. Arthur's body convulsed and dropped hard into the mud, face inches from his wife's grave. A gasp escaped from a nearby mourner who hadn't left yet. Someone screamed, "What are you doing? He's a veteran." David froze, realizing too late the horror of what he'd just done. The rain grew heavier. Arthur lay motionless for several seconds before weakly rolling onto his side, coughing, clutching the flag that had fallen into the dirt. The fabric, soaked, muddy, and trembling in his grip, seemed to cry for him, and in that moment, everything stopped. The rookie officer had no idea that within the next 7 minutes, his entire view of the world and of duty would change forever. By the time the ambulance arrived, everyone in that cemetery would be crying. The moment the taser wires retracted, silence blanketed the cemetery, heavier than the rain, heavier than the grief. The crowd of mourners who had lingered by the gates stared in disbelief. The priest's umbrella slipped from his hand and fell to the ground. Officer Reynolds froze, heart hammering. He had followed every step of procedure, but something deep inside him, something human, screamed that this was wrong. The man on the ground wasn't resisting. He wasn't a criminal. He was just broken. Arthur tried to push himself up, trembling. His soaked uniform clung to him like chains. The flag in his hands was streaked with mud, its stars barely visible. He coughed, spitting rainwater and dirt, then looked up at the officer through eyes filled not with anger, but with hurt. "You tase me," Arthur whispered, voice hoarse. "At my wife's grave." David's throat tightened. He stepped forward, words fumbling. "Sir, I didn't mean, I thought you were." Arthur interrupted with a bitter, weary laugh that turned into a cough. "You thought I was what? A danger? A trespasser?" He gestured weakly toward the headstone. "That's my Evelyn. She's all I had." Rain poured harder now. It ran down the letters on the grave, as if the sky itself was weeping. One of the older mourners, Mrs. Calloway, an 80-year-old neighbor who had known the Miles family for decades, stepped out from the group. "Young man," she said sternly to the officer, "that man served this country for 30 years. His wife took care of every neighbor on this street. You ought to be ashamed." David's hands trembled. I was just doing my job." "No," she said softly. "You were following rules. But there's a difference between rules and right." Arthur finally stood, weak but proud, holding the dirty flag against his chest. "Don't blame him," he muttered. "He's just young. Doesn't know yet what loss really feels like." David's gaze fell to the ground. Guilt clawed at his stomach, and then something unexpected happened. Arthur walked past him, toward the priest, and knelt again beside his wife's grave. He placed the ruined flag over the casket lid gently, as if trying to tuck her in one last time. He whispered, "Eve, even now, the world doesn't understand peace." The officer's chest ached. The radio on his shoulder crackled. "Unit 12, report status. Back up en route." David didn't respond. Instead, he slowly walked over to Arthur and knelt beside him in the mud, his knees soaking, his badge catching the rain. "I'm sorry, sir," he said quietly. I didn't see who you were." Arthur turned, tears and rain mixing on his face. "You don't need to see who I am," he said softly. "You just need to see people." For a moment, the cemetery was still again. The onlookers began to cry quietly, not because of what had happened, but because of the raw humanity unfolding before them. David reached out hesitantly, then picked up the fallen flag. He wiped the mud with his sleeve, carefully, reverently, like he was holding something sacred. "Let me fix this," he whispered. Arthur nodded faintly. And so, under that gray sky, a young officer and an old soldier stood side by side, one trying to make amends, the other trying to forgive. They didn't know it yet. But what happened next would turn that moment of shame into one of redemption. For both of them, rain kept falling, but it no longer felt cold. It fell gently now, like the sky was apologizing. Officer Reynolds stood silently as Arthur brushed off the last bit of mud from the folded flag. His movements were slow, deliberate, filled with respect. Each crease of that flag carried memories of deployments, letters from home, birthdays missed, and promises kept. David finally spoke, voice trembling. "You said she waited for you. Through everything?" Arthur nodded without looking up. "She wrote me every single week, even when I couldn't write back. Said she'd keep the light on in the window until I came home. 30 years she kept that promise." He paused, swallowing hard. "When I got back from my last tour, she was already sick. Cancer doesn't care who you served or what medals you have." David looked down at his own hands, clean, unscarred, soft. He had grown up in a quiet suburb, never knowing what war really took from people. All he'd ever learned were procedures and checklists. Now, standing beside this man, those things suddenly felt small. Arthur continued, voice breaking. "She was strong, stronger than me. Even on her bad days, she'd say, 'You face worse, Sergeant Miles.' I'd smile, but inside, I was scared every second of losing her." He exhaled shakily. And when she died, I didn't even cry. Not at first. I thought soldiers weren't supposed to. David listened, really listened. No notebook, no protocol, no uniform could teach this kind of pain. The priest, still nearby, quietly stepped forward and placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder. She would have been proud of you for being here today, Arthur. For staying strong. Arthur shook his head. Strong? I was supposed to protect her. That was my mission, Father. And I failed. David's chest tightened. He couldn't bear the weight of his own mistake, tasing a man already drowning in grief. His voice cracked. Sir, I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can try to make it right. Arthur looked at him for the first time. Really looked. There was no hatred in his eyes, only exhaustion. Then start by remembering, he said softly. Remember what you did here. Not to carry guilt, but to carry compassion. David blinked away tears. The word compassion echoed in his mind like a new oath. Then Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver medal, the bronze star. The edges were worn. The ribbon faded. He held it out toward David. I got this for pulling 2 men out of a burning Humvee in Kandahar, Arthur said quietly. But this medal isn't courage. It's pain polished to look like honor. David shook his head quickly. I can't take that. Arthur pressed it into his palm. You're not taking it. I'm giving it. So that the next time you see someone who's hurting, you don't reach for your weapon. You reach for your heart. David's eyes filled with tears. The weight of that medal, light as it was, felt heavier than his badge. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The only sound was rain tapping against the metal of the casket. Then, somewhere beyond the gates, a single trumpet began to play, soft and haunting. Someone had called for military honors. But none of them expected it would come so soon. Arthur straightened his back, saluted the grave, and whispered, Rest now. My love. David, without hesitation, stood beside him and saluted too. Every mourner watched in silence, an old veteran and a young officer. United by grief, redemption, and a muddy flag, the haunting trumpet echoed across the cemetery, each note carrying sorrow, reverence, and something deeper forgiveness. The rain had softened now into a mist, and every droplet sparkled faintly on the polished headstones like tears that refused to fall. Officer David Reynolds stood rigid beside Arthur Miles, both saluting in silence. But inside, David's mind was racing. He'd been trained to react, not to feel. Yet here, beside this man who had lost everything, his heart broke open in a way he'd never known possible. He lowered his hand slowly, still clutching the bronze star in his fist. Sir, he whispered, voice trembling, I'll carry this with me, not as an award, but as a reminder. Every call I answer from now on, I'll remember this moment. Arthur gave a faint nod. That's all I could ask. From behind them, the priest stepped forward again, motioning gently toward David. Officer, would you mind helping us finish the burial? David blinked in surprise. Me? Arthur looked at him, eyes tired but kind. You started this day with orders. Maybe you can end it with honor. David hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He removed his rain cap and stepped forward. Together, he and Arthur picked up the ropes attached to the casket, lowering it the rest of the way into the ground. Their hands, one young and steady, the other trembling and scarred, moved in unison. The murmuring of the mourners softened into quiet sobs. Every single one of them knew they were witnessing something sacred, a moment that transcended uniforms, rules, and duty. When the casket touched the bottom of the grave, Arthur looked down and whispered, You're home now. Eve. David bent down beside him, scooped a handful of wet earth, and gently dropped it over the coffin. Rest easy, ma'am, he said quietly. You served your country too. Arthur's lip trembled. No one had ever said that before. Not once, not even during the service. He turned to David and whispered, Thank you. As the last of the soil fell, something shifted in the air. Not the weather, but the weight of grief. The veteran's shoulders seemed to ease for the first time. His breathing slowed. Peace, faint but real, began to settle over him. David's radio crackled again. Unit 12. Status check. Report immediately. He lifted it halfway, then clicked it off. This moment didn't need a report. Instead, he turned to the crowd. Everyone, please give him a few minutes alone. One by one, the mourners began to step back. Even the priest nodded in understanding. David stayed for a second longer, then spoke quietly. I'll wait by the gate, Sergeant. Take your time. Arthur managed a small, grateful smile. You've already given me more than time. Son, as David walked away, his boots squelching in the wet grass. The weight of his mistake remained, but so did something stronger. He understood now. Being an officer wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about guarding the humanity within it. He stopped halfway to the car and looked back. Arthur was kneeling again by the grave, hands clasped, head bowed. The rain had finally stopped. It had been exactly 7 minutes since the taser fired. 7 minutes, that was all it took for a man's heart to break, for another's to awaken, and for everyone present to remember that pain and mercy can exist in the same breath. And in those 7 minutes, everyone cried. The clouds finally parted as Arthur sat quietly by his wife's grave. The sky turning from gray to a gentle silver blue. The world seemed still, as if it too wanted to give this man one last moment of peace. He brushed the fresh earth with his fingers, whispering softly, "You can rest now. Eve, I'll be all right." But even as he said it, his chest tightened. He wasn't sure if he believed it. Then, as he was about to stand, something caught his eye. A small, sealed envelope tucked beneath the flowers at the base of the headstone. It was protected from the rain by a clear plastic sheet. On the front, in gentle handwriting he knew better than his own, were the words, "For Arthur, when you finally say goodbye." His breath caught. His fingers trembled as he picked it up and opened it carefully. Inside, the paper was soft, slightly faded, but the ink still carried her warmth. He began to read, "My dearest Arthur, if you're reading this, it means I've finally gone home, not the kind of home you can find on a map, but the kind that waits beyond pain and fear. Please don't wear that uniform today to remind others who you were. Wear it to remind yourself who you are, a man who never stopped fighting for love, even when the battles were over. Don't let grief turn your medals into chains. The world will never understand everything you gave up, but that's all right. You didn't serve for recognition. You served because your heart knew how to protect. And when the day comes that you stand here unable to let go, look around. Someone will be watching you. Someone who still believes in good. Teach him kindness. Teach him what you taught me, that even pain can be noble if it leads to compassion. I'll be waiting, my love. Until then, live." Evelyn Arthur's vision blurred as the tears finally came, not of sorrow this time, but of release. The letter fluttered gently in his hand, and he pressed it to his heart. Behind him, Officer Reynolds watched quietly from the distance. When Arthur turned, their eyes met, two souls who had both been changed forever. Arthur walked toward him slowly, holding the letter. "She knew you'd be here," he said softly. David frowned in confusion. "What do you mean?" Arthur smiled faintly. "She always believed in signs. Said when I'd reached the edge of my strength, God would send someone not to save me, but to remind me why I should keep living." David swallowed hard, emotion catching in his throat. "I don't deserve that kind of grace, sir." Arthur shook his head. "None of us do. That's what makes it grace." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Arthur reached out his hand. David took it firmly. No ranks, no titles. Just two men who found meaning in the wreckage of a terrible mistake. As the last rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, Arthur said quietly, "You keep that medal, officer. But one day, when you find someone who's hurting, and you see that same look in their eyes, pass it on. Let it keep traveling until kindness becomes its own uniform. David nodded, eyes glistening. I will, sir. I promise. Arthur gave a soft smile. Then my mission's complete. He turned one last time to his wife's grave, whispered, Rest easy. Love, and walked away slowly, his silhouette framed against the golden light of the setting sun. As David watched him leave, he opened his hand. Staring at the bronze star resting in his palm, the reflection of the sun on the metal shimmered like a heartbeat. And for the first time in his career, he truly understood what service meant. Not the badge, not the uniform, but the heart behind it. You're still here, and that means you cared enough to listen till the end, and that's rare these days. If this story hit home for you, please subscribe, and let me know your thoughts. I read them all, and I value every word.